Hey guys, I'm getting here to get into Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained, which he released in 2012. Which, yeah, this was done a complete 180 for me within a decade span. I used to not care for this film too much because I think I hadn't fully adjusted to Tarantino's unique kind of outlook, which is like on like kind of all these offbeat kind of historical dramas he was making. Like Glorious Bastards came around and it did shake me up a lot, but I think that one was a lot more rooted in Tarantino's classic outlook. I think Django Unchained is, by contrast, a very dark romance film. I think that's what makes this perhaps the most mature in storytelling, and I think it is a new shade of Quentin Tarantino in so many different ways that in a lot of ways I feel like I've still needed time to catch up to it because he was actually inventing a new genre with this film, which is kind of like the Western blaxploitation. Like he was literally trying to be like that, that because he had Good, the Bad, the Ugly Foundation, and as well as a lot of the blaxploitation films coming out in the '70s, and just kind of combine those two into something of his own recipe entirely. And you know what? This is stunning. I mean, this is kind of to me as just an incredibly rich portrayal of one of the worst, most humiliating chapters of American history, and it just kind of just takes you right through it in a way, just like Glorious Bastards does, where it gives you justice where justice deserves, and then it gives people the dark ending that with the ones who deserve a dark ending. And it just the way this plays out. I mean, this is a really seriously dark subject matter. Maybe that's what a lot of had to catch up to me. It's just like I think Quentin Tarantino is being like a modern peacemaker with this whose trilogy of the Glorious Bastards, Django Unchained, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And yeah, this whole film is just about you're just getting all these like just criminal bounty hunters and whatnot, and then just the friendship that comes with one of them, Christoph Waltz and Jamie Foxx, one of the slaves. He frees him from one of the landlords, and then they kind of end up becoming quite a successful team. While what this slave, what Jamie Foxx is trying to do is free his wife, who is also in slavery. The guise of an even worse place, where Leonardo DiCaprio's character is kind of candy. It's like he's one of those evil characters DiCaprio's ever played, maybe not the most evil characters he's ever played. The perfect screenplay, and there's nothing here that just really doesn't offer something completely original to the table as far as Quentin Tarantino. Like again, the most directly story driven he's ever been. Like this isn't. I think that's what that needed to acquire to. This is more straightforward than his other stuff. Everything he made before was popping around at time a lot more, playing around time. Typically, this film's playing around time. This is the time he doesn't really do that so much here. Like there's maybe a few flashback sequences, but really, this is a straightforward linear film for Quentin Tarantino. He just wanted to focus more on kind of the emotional spectrum of just kind of again, like just you can't. And I think this is exactly the kind of love film that gets my heart the most. As opposed to again the film that came out the same year, Moonrise Kingdom. That's a challenging film in a lot of ways because that's a excellently made film. I mean, it's gorgeous. I love the set design. I love everything around it, but I just don't care about the characters. And I think that romance is simply there is a level I find too sweet and simple for me, and I think that just might be too much of that because. Yeah, like I like my stuff to be really, really complicated. I like to see people who really had to work hard to get to where they were in their success romantically. So this is a film that takes me through the ultimate one, where it's like, okay, damn it, like never has it been more warranted, for a couple to end up together here. Because geez, the harshness. I mean, literally, the harsh depths of slavery are kind of put upon them too. So when you kind of have that over the top sort of. No, it's not over the top. It's really happened. I mean, the directing almost feels over the top because it's almost just taking you right into the swing in the most over the top way of how harsh some of that violence really felt to an extent, where it's just like, man, I just have to. And this is just extremely memorable the entire way through. I mean, again, best film I've ever seen on the topic of slavery. I mean, the film 12 Years a Slave came out the same year. This happened with a lot of stuff. I think, and same with the Glorious Bastards. It almost like Quentin Tarantino's almost transcends historical dramas and making something extremely entertaining while doing complete justice to how horrible it really was. And that's I'd say really tough to balance. It's easy to overdo it, this kind of thing. But somehow Quentin Tarantino does kind of nail it. I think he spent a lot of his career building up to these three particular films. This is a big one for him. Because again, I think every film of his kind of feels like a Western, but this is the first time he actually got directly into the Western genre in a lot of ways. But yeah, this is just a really complicated view on a very dark, humiliating chapter in our recent history. I mean, when I watch this, I'm like, yeah, goodness gracious. Like, this is under 200 years ago. And yeah, right around the South and everything. So it's like, this is like the best love film ever made. If you look at it like a very epic love film, I think that this changes completely. It's the most probably the most romantic film Quentin Tarantino ever made in a sense, because this whole film is just like the tragedy about all this. And I think, okay, wow, this completely transcends how I like to see this kind of story unfold. I mean, who better than Quentin Tarantino to make a film like this, it feels like. And that's the thing; it's extremely entertaining, and yeah, like some of the stuff's brutal, but like ultimately, it also manages to be quite it manages to be successfully very entertaining, as much as it enlightening through all its like horrific violence. But it just simply makes you feel so much. It's such a sensory experience. Um, yeah, some of these scenes are just really explosively horrifying to watch in a violence in its portrayal of violence. But then like it's like usually the excitement comes from the necessary revenge. It's like you're seeing such awful bastards, and it's like, well, it's a different outlook than Inglorious Bastards. Again, this is like a more mature kind of story, I would say, because it really is just like, again, a man's going through all this. It's almost like asking yourself, well, how far will a man go for the sake of his love, basically. And yeah, endless steps he goes through in this film. He figures out what freedom really is to him, and that's what this whole film is exploring. It's like how can you find that extent of freedom? That's the thing. It's like this is such a perfect film because it is like Quentin Tarantino kind of continuing himself, evolving himself from Inglourious Basterds, from a film that was already just kind of inventing its own language and rewriting history. And this is kind of an instance where rewriting history just kind of became this really unique sort of outlook on a romance, literally. Person who just fights extensively for it, and that's what makes this my kind of romance film. It's also really fun. There's some great moments of dark comedy lingering throughout too, particularly like Jonah Hill in it. There's some really like crazy stuff with Ku Klux Klan. It does kind of. That's the thing. It almost makes light of it while giving it to me. Somehow it doesn't like, and I think it's just this did challenge people when it first came out. I think it even challenged me a little in that way. Is this almost too much? But I'm like, well, it's like when you put it out in the real world in modern times. I think most people, I think watch this, and people I've talked to who have like, it's like just a little more rooted with some of these historical events. Watch this, and they say everyone in their family loves this film. Okay, therapy. This is therapy. Quentin Tarantino is obviously on your side, so it's like, yeah. Just like, and it's a big leap from like, from like Jackie Brown, which is also Quentin Tarantino really explored the blaxploitation genre, because that was one of the biggest blaxploitation that started Jackie Brown, Pam Grier. So Unchained is just kind of almost continuing all that into just getting right into the depths of horrors that a lot of people were facing. So one of the biggest reasons to watch this film is just the character of Django himself, which is just, he really is a complete character. He's and the characters do feel a little more three-dimensional than ever before. That's another thing about this. This might be the most deep character in a way. As far as like how much you kind of get to learn about him and its motives while still being a mysterious kind of character. It's completely different than any Sergio Leone character. Like, this is just a very original one. So is Dr. King Schultz, who has this very realistic kind of friendship with Django, because it's very like challenging. It's very electrifying the entire way through. Like, again, all these contradictions are kind of, this guy has a lot of contradictions to him, but somehow it all adds up to this amazing character. And then of course just Calvin Candy, like Leonardo DiCaprio is absolutely insane. Yeah, it's literally just about the most insane character ever. So, jeez, Christ, he's a psycho. Leonardo DiCaprio plays it perfectly. I love all these different shades of Leonardo DiCaprio I've gotten through all these different directors and films over the past few decades. Amazing. With Scorsese and Tarantino's eye on him. But yeah, everything about this, it is heavily stylized, but again, plenty of substance that took a lot of time to wash over me, even. But, and a lot of people, I think but a lot of people got it right away. So it's like, it's also realizing how funny it is too. That's the thing. It just isn't really like any other Western ever made. I think Quentin Tarantino was out to invent a completely new kind of Western and completely reinvent the world, just like Sergio Leone was doing with his films back in the 60s. I think Quentin Tarantino wants to do the same thing for the 2010 onwards. Kind of create the modern icon in a lot of ways, and keep perfectly on wavelength with, I think how the best way to perceive a lot of this stuff, which is the light of the darkness. I think it's kind of agreed, like it's worth having as being able to have a sense of humor about some really dark things. It's worth being able to, bond on that, because there is love in that. We can find love in just connecting on, being able to lighten up on this stuff. Lighten up about this intense subject matter. Yeah, it's perfect. Sure, Quentin Tarantino's Australian accent's a little awkward, but it's still just entertaining all the same, just to kind of see all the passion going into it all. And it's somehow just seeing him just play this, it somehow ends up being more charming, way more charming than annoying. But it's one of my it's my favorite film ever made, revolving around some really painful events in history. So again, definitely the best love film ever made. Yeah, I recommend this film. Not to, I mean, it's brutal, but if you're up for some brutal, if you're willing to put up with some brutal violence about stuff that really happened, and kind of in its own way, it sounds like, and this is what's challenging, community challenging. It's always making light of some war violence, but it's not glorifying whatsoever. Obviously, some people are going to watch the stuff and take it that way, but that's not the filmmaker's intention. He's just trying to take you through something kind of transcendent, and he wants to wow you, amaze you, basically. Something horrible, and then, well, this is how love triumphs in the end. That's what Django Unchained is out to do and express. It's quite magnificent at doing so. So if you're up for an extremely brutal film, and if you're a fan of Quentin Tarantino, I will recommend this film strongly.